Welcome to the Shamanism Global Summit, an extraordinary gathering of teachers and healers from around the planet, sharing insights, principles, and rituals for personal and collective healing and transformation. Please share this event with your friends and family, and come join us on Facebook at The Shift Network. And now your host, Michael Stone.
My first guest today is Alberto Villoldo. He's a medical anthropologist and psychologist who studied the shamanic healing practices of the Amazon and the Andes for more than 25 years. Alberto's the founder of the Four Winds Society, which teaches the philosophy and practice of energy medicine. He also directs the Center for Energy Medicine at Los Lobos, Chile, where he investigates and practices the neuroscience of enlightenment. Dr. Villoldo is the author of numerous best-selling books, including Power Up Your Brain with Dr. David Perlmutter, Shaman, Healer, Sage, and the Wall Street Journal's top 10 best-selling One Spirit Medicine, which merges the ancient healing traditions of the Peruvian shamans with modern scientific breakthroughs. You can find out more about Alberto by going to thefourwinds.com. So Alberto Villoldo, welcome to the Global Shamanism Summit. It's great to have you, my friend.
Thank you, Michael. Good to be with you again.
We were talking about the new emerging story and the old story and how that affects us in the way we're being in the world in everyday life. And I'd love for you to speak a little bit about your sense of this and how the old story is shaping us and how the new story is emerging and how we can get on the story wagon.
Absolutely. Well, Michael, our stories for humanity today were shaped when the Earth was still flat, before the Hubble Space Telescope, when we still lived in a universe and not in a multiverse, and when we had unlimited resources from nature because there were so few humans around. And today that story has exhausted itself. It's killing us. So we're so in need of a new human story. And also individually, we're so in need of a new story that is not based on being victims and being disempowered. So it's such a critical time for us to be revisioning our collective and our personal stories.
Yeah, that's great. So let's start out a lot of things in what you said there, but let's start out about defining the old story and why in this world of limited resources with this economic system that's driving much of the destruction today, how that old story of markets and money and growth are impacting our ecosystems and the whole web of life.
Well, I think that if you want to look at the story, got to look at the characters in the story. And right off the top, we're looking at Donald Trump, and we're looking at the proponents of big business and GMO foods, and greed is good, and the measure of success being how much you have in the bank instead of how much you contribute to the quality of life in this planet. So if we look at the players, my God, what a cast of characters we've picked out to live the story through.
It's so true. It's if it wasn't so serious.
Who's in charge of this essential casting? It's like wow. So we're in trouble, and we're trying to patch and fix the old story in the same way that we try to rescue the banks, and we're trying to save the economy, and we're trying to create jobs and build a wall with Mexico and let the Mexicans pay for it. And we can thrive, but our neighbors can starve. And the drug problem is obviously a Mexican problem, right? Because they're producing it. No, it's a U.S. problem because we're consuming it. So the old story has become so toxic, debilitating, and it doesn't offer an out.
Yeah, and it's becoming so obvious, I think, that people are actually waking up to it. But there are a couple things. One that you mentioned, the sense of being victims in the story, which we have the power to write, and also the sense in the U.S. of entitlement. Can you talk a little bit about those two issues?
They go hand in hand. And but let me go back first to what's necessary for us to come up with a new story. And for the shaman, that requires that you die, that you go through a process of symbolic death where you don't, pick the good to take with you and leave the bad behind, but you come to die to everything that you have been. And then in the process, you can become a hero in your story and not a victim. And because when you're a victim, then you have this tremendous entitlement mentality that comes along with it. I want to start out, I was just at the bank today, and the teller was saying to me, we can't hire people anymore. They all want to start out being vice presidents. And or I deserve to be taken care of by someone, by my partner, or by the state, or by, so we're not taking ownership of our stories. And when that happens, who takes ownership of it is it's big business and the media.
Yeah, it's kind of like we're spear carriers in someone else's opera, not recognized that we have the opportunity to be the author of our own story and to really own it.
Yeah, and then in the shamanic model, we want to break away from the story. We want to understand that we're not our story, that we're not our childhood, that we're not what happened to us when we were 12, that we're not what happened to us yesterday or 2 weeks ago, but rather that we're the storytellers. And when we can become the storytellers, we can maybe then author and pen a story that has more depth and purpose and joy and meaning and power.
Yeah, exactly. And, I think sometimes, especially from some of the comments I get in my classes for the Shift Network, that the death of our identity is more fearsome and there's more resistance to it than actual physical death. We have this narrative that has become who we are, and what people don't realize is the narrative's sole purpose is its own survival. So how do we actually separate ourselves enough to become a witness to our story and not caught up in the story?
Well, I think that we had to expand the theme of story to include our karma, our family history, but even our genetic stories. The fact that we inherited certain genes that predispose us to live and to get sick and to die in particular ways. And for the shaman, you understand that you can rewrite that story also, that you're not your genes, that you are your dreams, and that you're not your family history, and that you can observe that because you're kind of acting that out. That's kind of the role that was available when you were born, but you can find a different role to play in this great drama that we're in together, and one which is more creative. And where you're not the product of earlier causes. You got to break out of cause and effect. We're not the product of our childhood. We're not the product of our genes. Unless we don't come up with a better story, then we default to the basic program.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really exciting to me from a shamanic point of view, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this, but the information that I get and my experience of that is that when we work with the shadow material, when we bring the light to that material and actually move towards wholeness and a healing, we not only have a healing in our life and in our community, and that's a whole other area we can talk about, but we have a healing in our ancestors and future generations. Can you talk about that area?
How do you see that working, Michael? Let me be the interviewer for a while.
From my perspective and the information I've gotten from guides, it's been that. So if let's say that I have an ancestor that is not a helping spirit or an ally, and that has been someone who was an alcoholic or a womanizer, a molester, or murderer, perhaps. And in our line, in our history, that those ancestral habits, habitual ways of being, have been all along being passed down from generation to generation. At some point, when we stop that inherited information that is not only in the collective of our family, but genetically, that shifts when we shift, so it shifts for behind us isn't influencing us anymore, and future generations are no longer being impacted or have to be impacted by being a victim of that story. That's my perception on it. I'm really interested in yours.
I like it. I'll sign on for that one. It works. It works. You know, the other thing is we have to remember the context of the planet right now, of nature, that we're living in the sixth major extinction event since life appeared in the planet 2 billion years ago. You know, there are more species being lost, and this one is due to climate change and human action. All of the previous extinction events, the last one was 65 million years ago, when a gigantic meteorite struck the Earth and wiped out all of the dinosaurs. But we've created this one, and this is all functioning in our collective unconscious, and is informing each one of us today. We feel that we're being stalked by death. We see the end of days happening around us. We see and we want to protect ourselves and our families and what we own and who we think we are. But we are in the process of having to come up with a grander story, and we're being forced to it. It's no longer an option, and it's or otherwise the human story as we know it is going to come to an end shortly. So this is another factor that, because people consider their genetics and they consider their ancestors, but we are all part of a collective human story that has exhausted itself, and that's killing our mother. We're committing a kind of matricide where we're killing our own mothers. And so this is the background. This is the set in which our personal stories is unfolding. It's one of tremendous chaos and potential devastation for all of us. So this is impacting us, and we have to figure out how we fit into this in a way that we're part of the solution and not part of the problem. And that's where the new story has to emerge.
And the good news in all of that is that when we recognize that we create it, we can also recognize that we therefore have the power to change it. And in fact, the human species has gotten so powerful in its dominion over the web of life on Earth that we are the only solution to changing that story and creating a new story. And you know, it brings up, you mentioned earlier on, perhaps a lot of people don't appreciate the perspective on the multiverse, but I'd like for you to express that in terms of this, because all possibilities are available in the multiverse. And I think that's a great thing to share with people.
You know, the big debate in physics right now is whether we live in a multiverse in which there are parallel universes happening concurrently and simultaneously all around us, in which everything is possible. And if that's the case, then we're surrounded by we're not only living in an infinite universe, but an infinite set of multiverses. And so the human journey continues beyond this earth. And if we hold our story only within the context of the 60 or 70 or 80 or 100 years that you're allotted here, you're going to be really shortchanging yourself. Now, this is where the shamanic teachings are so important, because they say that death is just a gateway. And many of the shamanic initiations, as you know, have to do with experiencing your death symbolically so that you can step into infinity and you can break outside of ordinary time as we know it. And so this is a story that I think so many of us are trying to bring to the forefront. Not only do we have to take stewardship of this earth and of this body, with what we eat and how what our carbon footprint is individually, but we also have to come up with a better story that includes the journey beyond this life. What are we evolving into as conscious beings? And this is where the maps that have been left to us by shamans, whether they be in Tibet or in the Americas, are so valuable because they've mapped this territory beyond death. And the more we become familiar with these maps, the more that we can integrate them into our future destiny.
Yeah, it's beautiful. One of the things that people that I work with find often is that they're trying to change the story. They're trying to suppress it. They're doing positive thinking, like the little train that could. And really, the story, from my perspective, of what needs to happen there is that we aren't going to change that story. We need a story with a larger context that holds all stories, a story that is without separation, that is a story that's connected, a story that allows the lawnmower in the head to go ahead and make its noise, but know that we're not that noise any more than we're our hand, even though we have a hand. So, instead of looking at change, which in the French proverb, change creates persistence, what we really need is a transformation or transfiguration, transmutation. I don't know what the trans of it is, but what are your thoughts around when we create a story like a hero's journey that you mentioned, that we can create a bigger context that includes that story or the remembered past, and at the same time and create a more powerful created future?
Well, let me tell you a story.
I love it when you tell stories.
For many years, we would take, through the Four Winds Society, which is my teaching organization, we would take expeditions to the Andes and sometimes to the canyons in the American Southwest. And we would go to one particular canyon, which was the birthplace of the Hopi, where they have the cliff dwellings, where the ancient cliff dwellers lived, the Anasazi, in Canyon de Chelly. And we had been there many times, and I had befriended an old Navajo medicine woman, wrinkled as the hills, beautiful old woman in her 70s or 80s, and the sun darkened and wore all of her jewelry. And so we became friends over the years, and she asked me one time, Alberto, what's your story? And I said, well, I was born in Cuba and raised in a country where there was a revolution at the age of 10, and there was warfare, and my father left, and he had to, hide to save his life, and I never grew up with a positive role model of what it was like to be a man. And I've been looking for that all my life. And she said to me, interesting. And I asked her, well, what's your story? And we were inside this gorge, this canyon with red cliff walls. And she said, the red rock canyon walls am I, the desert wind am I, that child that did not eat today at the reservation am I. And I went, wow, what an interesting story, so much better than boy looking for daddy. And this happened about 20 years ago. And a couple of days later, I'm flying back home to Los Angeles, where I was living at that time. And I fly a lot, so I get bumped up to first class a lot. And the rule in an airplane is you don't talk to the person next to you. So, except when you're about to land, and the guy next to me asked me, well, who are you? And I tell him, the red rock canyon walls am I, the desert wind am I. And he looks at his drink, and he looks at me, and he goes, oh, shit. And he goes back out of first class back into coach thinking, who is this weirdo? And of course, I was just making that story up because I was still, my energy body, my emotional body was still a little boy looking for daddy. And it took many years for me to let go of that story that I was trying to heal for so long until I discovered one day that I could simply put it in the fire if I brought enough power and intentionality to it. And and now I can say that. Now I know that I am the Red Rock Canyon walls, that I know that I am made of starlight, that I know that I am in a body, and I am also a steward of this planet. But back then it wasn't. So in order for us to get to these greater inclusive stories that you've been bringing up, we have to go through a death of who we think we have been. And if we don't go through that voluntarily, life will take us through it in the form of illness, and so many shamanic initiations are healing processes where the shaman recovers from being very, very sick, or will lose a loved one, or will go through a great loss of everything that's been important to us. And, our truck will roll over. And that's happened to many of our listeners. They've had that experience in their life. They've lost a loved one. They've nearly lost their health. They're going through a recovery of health journey. And that's the time to not recover the old story, but to become the storyteller again, to realize that person was never real anyway, did not really exist, that it was simply an assembly of stories that we inherited, and that we did not know better at that point to pick up the pen and paper and write our own. And with the Andean shamans that I train with, I spent 25 years in the high mountains in the Andes. When they're making an offering to Mother Earth or to Spirit, they put together the seeds and the plants and the flowers, all of the best seeds of their harvest. And then they also put in the center a little piece of gold foil and a piece of silver foil. And they call it the Corilibro and the Colquelibro, the golden book and the silver book. And they say that when you're born with one of these books already written. And you could spend your entire life editing that book, and believe me, it needs editing. Or you can start writing your own story in the other book. And many of us die with a book that is so heavily edited, but the other one are still blank pages. So in our work and with my students, I tell them, what's the story that you want to write for yourself? How is it infused with meaning and with purpose? What is the mission that you selected for yourself even before you were born? And so this is critical, particularly at the time that we're living in, when shamanism is no longer shaking feathers and rattles, but bringing forth a new story for humanity and for people who are recovering their health or maintaining their health so that their health span can equal their lifespan. That's a story that I want to live.
That's brilliant. I love it. And, what I was thinking as you were speaking there is that shamanism is evolving, and probably why it's survived 100,000 plus or minus years is that it is, and so is the universe. The universe seems to be going somewhere. And, from my perspective and what I see, it seems to be going towards interconnected consciousness, some form of expanded consciousness throughout the universe. And so when we're looking at our story, this pre-programmed story that's handed down to us through ancestors, family, society, culture, this story of separation and all these blocks that we have to, I'm not enough, I'm unworthy, I can't do this, I'm not that kind of person, all of those kinds of stories, rather than being blocks with the intention. And again, as you've spoken of many times, intention is really key in shamanism, with the intention to shift from seeing those as blocks to seeing them as portals to healing our neuroses and, just an overall, every single one of those things, when we step into the fear and the resistance of them, allows us to grow in that sense. So those things, those thoughts and feelings and expressions that people have that are in some way holding them back then become opportunities for growth and wholeness and healing. I'm wondering what your thoughts are around that issue.
Well, I think you put it very, very clearly that it's the issue is truly a portal, and if you look at it as an issue, it's going to become a bigger issue. And if you look at it as a gateway, like death is a problem. If you wake up every morning and you go, I only have 22,000 days left in my life, and now there's only, so death can be a portal, can be a gateway, or it can be a real serious problem if you're haunted by it every day. So this is if we look at in our training, for example, with what I do today is to train modern shamans that are steeped in the neuroscience and steeped in the biology and steeped in the ancient wisdom, because science is the current wisdom today. And what we do is that we learn that what the source of our compassion and our power are our deepest wounds. But when they are no longer living within us as wounds, but as sources of compassion, we bring them from inside of us, from our hearts and our guts, and put them in our shaman's altar, in our collection of medicine objects, because now they are what took us to that process of becoming whole. They took us into a journey of initiation, and we have to be grateful for them. So but as long as we keep going, well, I was born into the wrong family. You know how most of us were born into the wrong family? We should have been born. We should have been born into our best friend's family, because they had the really cool dads, and we had the idiots. And then we go, wow, thank you. I was born exactly where I needed to be born. And because otherwise I would not have learned these lessons. And then for our students, we take them to the next step, which is, what is that agreement that you made with Spirit even before you were born about what your journey in this earth was going to be like? Was it going to be about healing your depression? Was it going to be about dealing with your mommy issues? Was it going to be about getting free of scarcity? Or how about dreaming the world into being? And then the story becomes much more creative. The story is the journey. But if we confuse the collective story, which is what we call history is his story, the story told from a very masculine perspective of war and of conquest, then at that point we have no choice but to subscribe to it. And that paradigm of violence and of greed and of creating enemies, it's exhausted itself. And we know that, but if you look at the Middle East and many parts of the world, they don't. They're still trying to work from a paradigm of violence and scarcity, and you can never break out of it. You defeat your enemy, and then a new enemy shows up. How about getting rid of enemies altogether?
Really? Really?
Yeah.
And that's a story of right and wrong, good and bad, and this cultural morality that we have. And, one of the things that occurs to me, Alberto, is that we've been asking the wrong questions. The questions are, how can I get rid of this neuroses? Or how can I make more money? Or how can I find the right man or woman? And they're questions that have no power. The ancient questions, who am I? What am I here for? I love Mary Oliver's. She has a poem you probably know, and she says, what am I going to do with the one wild and precious life I've been given? And so I think a big area is looking at the questions, and the questions really have the power to rewrite our neuro pathways and create new neural pathways by dwelling in those questions. You mentioned neuroscience, and so much has happened in the last 10 years. I'd love to hear your thoughts about how that is supporting us in creating a new story.
Well, what we're learning today about the brain is that it's extraordinary. Stuff that we didn't know 20 years ago about neuroplasticity and epigenetics, how we are what we think, and we're not our genes. And in order to write a better story, we need to have the access to the neural resources that will allow us to do that, which is to the brain chemistry, the brain states. This is why shamans frequently took plants that were mind-enhancing plants, because it gave them access to the higher order cortical networks that allowed them to see the interconnectedness of all life. And then that's what allowed you to come into a different journey, and into a journey that was healed, where you realized that what you needed to fix was your perception and not your history. And even though we've been told that by so many people, that life is indeed a journey. And I want to read to you, since you brought Mary Oliver up, just a little quote from her in a poem called The Journey. One day you finally knew what you had to do and began, though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice, though the whole house began to tremble, and you felt the old tug at your ankles. Mend my life, each voice cried, but you didn't stop. You know what you had to do, though the wind pried with its stiff fingers at the very foundations, though their melancholy was terrible. It was already late enough in a wild night, and the road full of fallen branches and stones. But little by little, as you left their voices behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice, which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save. So, I love her work.
One of my favorite poems.
Isn't that beautiful? Yeah. So, I keep that one around me.
Let's talk about a couple things in that poem that I think are really important, and one of them is about the bad advice that we get. One of the things I've noticed in working with people is that they may have major changes in the work that they're doing, and then they go back into their families and their communities who see them from their old story, and will give bad advice, basically, based on how they know the person to have been before they had a death transformation experience. Let's take that piece and talk about the circle of influence of our families and communities and how they keep us bound to the story, and how do you see us being able to step out of the story in the face of a lot of bad advice and people holding us to the way we used to be?
Well, I think that there's a very simple solution to that, which is that you have to find that voice within and be true to it, because everything around you will strive to guide you in a direction that is not the one that you've chosen to go on, which is that great, long, and arduous journey, which is the hero's journey. I think that my wife, Marcella, will be speaking with you later at some point on the hero's journey from the point of view of the feminine, because the feminine is totally undistractable. It's the society we live in is so masculine that it needs justification, it needs approval, it needs to know, give me the science, give me the proof, where is it? No, the inner voice of the feminine is relentless. It will go against every obstacle. That's why God gave childbirth to women and not to men, you know. We would have blown it. We would have, month 7, we would have been going, is this a good idea? And so the masculine is eminently distractible, whereas the feminine, the soul, the psyche, when you hear that inner voice, you know that you're going back to an environment that doesn't support certain choices you've made spiritually and lifestyle, and you look at it with compassion. You don't judge, but you have to find that inner voice and be true to that compass that's been given to you, which has that guidance that will save you from the times that we're living in.
Yeah. Well said. And another of the things in that poem I thought pointed to the victimhood. You know, the mend my life. Somebody please fix me. The whole people have for give me a pill, give me a guru, give me someone. And while teachers can point in a particular direction, it's still up to each of us individually. What's your experience of that kind of people getting beyond that? I need to have someone show me the way, because this shamanism is a path of direct revelation ultimately.
Yeah, we can get back to your final sentence there in a minute, but in terms of the teacher is important. And this is because the teaching is always available, but a teacher is the one who brings you to the threshold of that. And I found that in my life, I've had very, very good teachers and very terrible teachers. When I was a medical anthropologist in the Amazon, and I met some terrible teachers, people I would consider sorcerers. And I've met some of those in Wall Street as well. But if you find a good teacher, you must look and you must test the teacher. And traditionally, the best shamans that I worked with in the field did not want any students. It was a problem. They weren't trying to sell themselves to you. They weren't going, here, take me, I'm a good teacher, come to my weekend workshop. Today we live in a marketplace where everything is available, so you must test the teacher, and the teacher will test the student. And the test can be very challenging, like the Amazon shamans that say, okay, you want to work with me here, jump into the deep part of the river. And you're going, but I'm learning to swim. They go, well, then maybe you better work with your nanny and then come back and see me. So a teacher is important. And there's many, many good teachers around. They're excellent. We live in a time of great teachers and great teaching available to us, from the Buddhist to the Christian to the shamanic. There's great, beautiful teaching available to us. Unfortunately, it's become a huge marketplace as well. But then you find your inner guidance. And when you find your inner guidance and are true to it, then it takes you to the teaching. And the lessons are many, but the teaching is one. There's only one teaching. But there are many, many lessons involved. And you will go through them. We will go through them. But the path of direct revelation is dangerous also, because if you haven't cleared your filters, then what you're going to be perceiving as the light of direct revelation will have all of the colors of your history and your identification that will really give you a distorted perspective of reality.
Yeah, no, I completely, am in alignment with that. I didn't mean to say that teachers weren't important. It's kind of how I see it, is that the teacher's driving the bus, and you're looking out the window, you're going to see what you're going to see, and you can be guided in that. at the same time, the real learning has to take place within ourselves to really be a learning and not just information. I guess I'm pointing to the distinction between information and wisdom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's one that you know is one of my favorite ones, and that in the shamans that I've worked with say that information is knowing that water is H2O, whereas wisdom is being able to make it rain. And information is having a diagnosis, and wisdom is being able to heal. And we live in an information age, but if you look around you, you realize that people are getting more and more stupid all the time. And the minute you realize that everyone around you is getting more and more stupid, you also realize that they're a mirror for you, and that you're getting more and more stupid. So, we take it as a call to wisdom, and to respond to wisdom, and then wisdom seeks you out. Actually, it'll begin to look for you. And this is but it requires making that statement of yes, saying yes. There's a wonderful word in the High Andes, which are the traditions that I spent many years studying. And the word is Ayni, A-Y-N-I. And Ayni means right relationship, coming into right relationship with all life. And with the trees and with the rivers and with the ancestors and with your great-great-grandchildren that are still not yet born, and with your story in this journey. But Ayni also means yes. It also means saying yes to the call from Spirit. And I remember in my own life, I would say to Spirit, my kids are not fully grown yet, and I still need to work at the university, and how am I going to support myself and my loved ones? So I would keep using my children as an excuse to saying yes to Spirit. And Ayni means living in a state of yes. Living in a state of yes so that you don't have to think about it. You live in yes. And then wisdom begins to actually stalk you. Death no longer is stalking you, but life and wisdom are. And today that's not a choice we can postpone any longer.
Yes, yeah. It's very much like the hero's journey you're talking about. We get the calling, and do we say yes to the calling? Do we go on the journey? Do we meet the perils and the fallen branches and the stones that are in the roadway, as Mary Oliver says? Do we step over them and say, yes, I'm on this journey?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was in the jungle one time in the Amazon, and I was fairly new in the Amazon, and I was told to not leave the trail because you can step out of the trail for 10 feet and never find it again because it all looks identical and it all sounds, the monkeys and the macaws and the parrots. And I did. I stepped off the trail to take a photograph. And then I was looking for the trail and I couldn't find it. I found another trail and I kept following it. And for hours and hours, and knowing that I was telling myself, I'm not lost. I just don't know where I am, because lost is a state of mind. And I'm not lost. I just simply don't know where I am. Now, 2.5 days later, I finally said to myself, Alberto, you're lost. You're totally lost. You have no idea where you are, where you're going. You're going to die out here. And then I found a stream. I found that led to a little tributary that led to the bigger river, and I hitchhiked a ride in a canoe. Somebody passing by, but when we're today, the reason I brought that story up is that we're all lost today. The old paradigms don't work anymore. And I have a friend of mine that's a doctor that wears a button that says, "Trust me, I'm a doctor." And another friend that has a button that says, "Trust me, I'm a banker." and we don't trust our money to our bankers. We don't trust our health to our doctors. We don't trust our security to the military. So we're living in times that we have to find our own inner guidance. And this is why the traditions that we work with, that you and I work with, and so many others are so very important right now.
Yeah, it's true. And that is, when I talk about direct revelation, it's not sans a teacher. It's, it is that way we have of processing and making the information our own to fit our own situation.
Absolutely. Yep, that is so important. Say a little more about that, Michael, because this is a really important topic.
Well, it's going back to what you said, really, the teacher-student relationship. And there are so many false gurus and charlatans out there in the marketplace now that the whole idea is, how can I see people making all this money. There's a wonderful movie called Kumari. I don't know if you saw it, but
yes,
I highly recommend it for some laughter of someone who decides he's going to, be a false guru, and he goes around and he gets all his followings. He keeps telling them, I'm really a fake. I'm not really the real thing, and he has them doing all these strange exercises and marching around and doing stuff, and then finally he cuts his hair and he looks like a normal person. He says, "See, I've been telling you that I'm just a normal person like you," which was, of course, a great teaching. But half the people got really angry and upset, and he was actually telling them the truth all the way. Mm-hmm. So that relationship for me is about finding what our truth is, that our truth at the of why we're here on the planet. What is our divine purpose in being here? What are the strengths and gifts that I have to contribute when I realize that I'm not separate from the web of life, but what are the gifts that I have to share with the world? And it's in that direction that I'm talking about, the real learning takes place when you get it. Again, moving from the idea of information into wisdom, as you were talking about, that's where the real power is, how we reclaim our power from all the ways we either suppress it or give it away to experts outside of ourselves. And that's really what I'm talking about. And Alberto, we're getting close to the end of our time, and I want to make sure that people get a sense of, I'm sure they got a sense of, but anything that you want to speak about in terms of the light energy field, the work that you do with the Four Winds Society, and anything else that you think would be important for our listeners in this Shamanism Global Summit that we're on.
Michael, what I do today is to train modern shamans, and we train Western shamans that are steeped in the neuroscience and in the old wisdom traditions and in the energy medicine. We train people in the practice of energy medicine by learning to intervene at the level of the luminous energy field, of the blueprint that organizes the body, this field of light that is full of information, is full of stories. It's full of stories about how we're going to live and die and who we're going to meet and karma. And when you can clear the imprints of disease and of the toxic stories from the field, you can grow a new body that ages differently and that lives differently and that loves differently and that dies differently. And this is so necessary today. It's so important. But what we're also doing is we're teaching people how to detox, how to clear the poisons from their body and from their mind. And this is so important today when you look at the statistics and discover that 50% of people that are 85 years old, and all of us want to at least live to be that old, that 50% of them will have diagnosable Alzheimer's. This is stunning. And when I was doing my field research as an anthropologist in the Amazon, and I was doing field research on the major killers in the West and found out that these people, the shamanic traditions, they have no heart disease, no cancer, no dementia, that these are the illnesses of the West. And we can prevent these by detoxifying the body and the mind and the emotions. And then we practice tremendous prevention. Shamanism is not about healing the body from disease only. That's your worst case scenario. You want to prevent disease and illnesses from manifesting. It's not about getting divorced. It's about becoming the right partner so you end up in the right relationship to begin with. It's not about repairing trauma only. It's about avoiding the experience of trauma in your life so you can really make your way back to that Garden of Eden that we were all living in and that you can create today with your health, with your relationships, with spirit. And this is what my job is today.
And you're doing a great job of it, my friend. I'm just thrilled to have you on today on this special summit that we're doing, and grateful to you for sharing your wisdom and your time and for your tireless work that you do with so many people around the world. It's just an honor.
Thank you, Michael.
To be with you.
Thank you, and blessings. It's my pleasure.
Thank you.
And good luck, and we'll see you next time.
I look forward to it.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us for the Shamanism Global Summit.